Hey everybody, Keep7 here, back with another card discussion, and today we are talking about Muxus, Goblin, Grandee, and the Goblins deck, the mono-red Goblins deck in Historic in general, but our focus will be on Muxus, Goblin, Grandee. So Muxus, Goblin, Grandee is a 6 mana, 4 and 2 red, legendary Goblin noble creature, and he is a 4/4. When Muxus, Goblin, Grandee enters the battlefield, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. Put all Goblin creature cards with converted mana cost 5 or less from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any random order. Whenever Muxus attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other Goblin you control. So, one of the biggest misconceptions that I think is out there about the Goblins deck, and this video is really going to be for novice players, for beginner players, for players who maybe don't have a lot of experience with Goblins. Maybe you're trying to build a Goblins deck and play it, and you just don't have the wild cards yet, so you don't have any experience playing. You don't understand it yet. Maybe you haven't watched other players or pros play it yet. And I think the biggest misconception that might be out there is that the Goblins deck is essentially just trying to ramp into Muxus, and that is completely untrue. That's how, when I first saw it, when I first saw the Goblins deck, kind of introduced into Historic, when Muxus came out and people started kind of creating these mono red and Rakdos Goblins decks, a lot of what I thought was it was kind of like the Garuda deck that was in Standard, a few months before that. I thought it was basically just ramp, Muxus, hope for the best. Where, in the same way that Garuda was ramp, Garuda, hope for the best. And it's completely untrue. Muxus is actually arguably one of the worst cards in the Goblin deck. Muxus is your, I have nothing else I can be doing right now. I'm just going to Hail Mary with Muxus, cross my fingers, hope for the best, and hope I get a god roll of the dice. You've tried to assemble other combo pieces in the Goblins deck. It didn't work. You have a Goblin and you have a Muxus in hand. You cast it and you just hope that you get like a Haster, a Krenko, maybe a couple other Goblins, maybe a conspicuous Snoop or something. You just get as much, a really great draw off Muxus. You get them onto the battlefield. You swing for 20 and end the game that way. That's the way I think Muxus is supposed to be played. You're not supposed to ramp into him, and play him on turn 6 and hope for the best then. You're supposed to try to assemble other stronger combo pieces first, and then when those don't work, you throw your Hail Mary. That's the way I think that Goblins is supposed to be played. I still could be wrong, but that's how I learned it wasn't ramping. It was more, it was the second way. It wasn't just ramp Muxus. It was, assemble combo pieces that are stronger than Muxus itself. If that doesn't work, your plan B, your emergency reset, your code red button is Muxus. So let's talk about what Goblins should try to do for those of you who maybe aren't in the know. And again, Muxus is, for the card discussion purpose, Muxus is a great card. I mean, it's very powerful. It can end a game. But Muxus is also a terrible card in that it's just a roll of the dice. You could hit 2, Skirk Prospectors. You could hit any number of terrible combinations of cards and not end the game. And more often than not, that's what happens. Every now and then Muxus, has like a fantastic pull. You get all the creatures you could ever need. Sometimes it's not even necessary. Sometimes you already have an established board. You cast a Muxus and you get even more. But relying on rolling the dice to win a game isn't an effective way to win games. And doing that and relying on Muxus is almost bad. That's why I think Muxus is one of the worst cards in the deck, because he's a Hail Mary, because he relies so much on RNG to be successful. So So that's kind of the end of the card discussion itself. Muxus is a good card and a bad card. He relies on luck, he relies on RNG, and although he's extremely powerful and can end games, a lot of the times it's rolling the dice isn't good enough in a competitive environment. Anyway, so for those of you who don't play a lot of Goblins and don't know a lot about it, maybe want to learn more, really what you're trying to do and what you should try to do is assemble a combination of Goblins. And really the best card in the Goblins deck is Krenko, not Muxus. You want to get a Krenko on the board as quickly as possible, and hopefully you want to have a board full of Goblins leading up to when you put your Krenko on the battlefield. And you hopefully want to have a Haster on before your Krenko, so that you can activate your Krenko immediately, spill the board with a bunch of Goblin creature tokens, and then either attack with them while they're buffed with another one of your with a Goblin War Chief or a Goblin Chieftain. they're either hasted with a Goblin War Chief or they're hasted and buffed with a Goblin Chieftain. So that's really the combo pieces that you want. You want Cranko and some sort of haster, either whether it's a War Chief or a Chieftain. And how you assemble those pieces is obviously either ramping with, or either finding it with Conspicuous Snoop, finding it or fetching it with Goblin Matron, or ramping into those pieces and they're already in your hand with either Skirk Prospector or Wily Goblin. So that's really the play patterns you want to be pursuing in the early parts of a game with Goblins. Get your Skirk Prospector or Wily Goblin down, get a Conspicuous Snoop down turn 2, and then maybe on turn 3 you get down a Haster, turn 4 you get down Cranko. And I mean, obviously that's a play pattern that assumes your opponent has little to no removal, but that's what you're pursuing. You want, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, all leading up to Muxus, and, Conspicuous Snoop, War Chief or Chieftain, Cranko, crank out Goblins with Cranko, so you crank out Goblins. I'll kill myself. You crank out a bunch of little 1/1 tokens, and either they're buffed or whatever, and you kind of work from there. Assuming your opponent has a lot of removal, they're going to get rid of their Cranko. They're going to get rid of the War Chief or the Chieftain. They're going to get rid of the Snoop, because Snoop can be incredibly powerful if you have, another Goblin on top of your deck that will enable, very powerful abilities very quickly or, right away. So they're going to remove some of those pieces, and then you Hail Mary it with Muxus. Or, obviously you try to assemble other combo pieces. Maybe you've drawn into more Goblins with your Herald's Horn or something like that. That's another thing that needs to be mentioned is Herald's Horn. Herald's Horn is an incredibly powerful turn 3 play. If you choose Goblins as the creature type, then you get to draw cards. I mean, it's just incredible what that card does for the deck. So if you're not playing Herald's Horn in your Goblins deck, get that in there, because it 100% belongs. Mind Stone is a card that could be included. It's not something I would play 4 of. Maybe a 2 of, maybe, if even. But that's about it. I mean, that's kind of that's all I really wanted to convey. For those of you who don't know Goblins too well, I just wanted to kind of get that out there, because it's a misconception that I had about Goblins for a long time. I had never played it. I had heard of it. I hated it. I always thought Muxus was the big bad, and he's really not. He's almost the worst card in a Goblins deck, and although he does need to be addressed at some point in the game, if you're looking at a Goblin player's hand with a Thoughtseize, it's not the first thing you should be removing from their hand. He is their Hail Mary, he is their plan B. Their plan A is kind of what I described before, ramping into something like ramping, or just getting a Cranko out on the board, cranking out a bunch of smaller creature tokens and using them to maybe ramp into a Muxus, or using them to attack for a bunch of damage or something like that. So, it's a combination of cards like that that's really going to do damage with Goblins, and that's the way you should be playing it. You shouldn't be using Muxus as your, it shouldn't be linear like ramp Muxus. It should be something more like assemble a combination of powerful Goblins first, if all else fails, Muxus. And that's really kind of the point of the video. Again, I feel bad because, any more advanced players out there probably kind of already know this information. So, but again, I'm trying to make videos for everybody. And if I had the misconception that Goblins was ramp into Muxus, then I think other people out there might. But, I learned a lot about Goblins from watching Autumn Burchett play Goblins. That's the first time I've ever seen somebody else play Goblins, during the championships. That was in late 2020, in her game against Brad Barkley. Obviously, it was very frustrating to watch because Brad Barkley was playing Control, and Control decks, I feel like, have a pretty strong. Well, Brad played very well, and maybe Control decks can't keep up with Goblins in some sense, but the way he was playing the Control deck was on an expert level, and was just able to control Goblins. So Autumn Burchett was unable to really get the wheels moving on the Goblins deck. So it was a difficult time, but I was able to kind of see the play patterns more clearly, and it was clear that Muxus really wasn't kind of the plan A, and was kind of a Hail Mary. And since then, I've seen a lot of Goblins. I've become more interested in playing Goblins, so I've been watching more players play it, and as the more you watch, the more you realize that Muxus is almost the worst card in the Goblins deck and is kind of, again, a Hail Mary. In a lot of situations, I see players cutting him because he's just too expensive and he's not really, again, how many Hail Marys do you really want in the deck? Do you want 4 Hail Marys? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you only want 2. And you want better combo pieces or more powerful Goblins. And Goblins has a lot of powerful cards in the sideboard. A Braid, Crater Maker, Incinerator, maybe more Herald's Horns, Chandra, Goblin Trashmaster, Ringleader, stuff like that. So there's just a lot. There's a lot to consider, and it's not as linear, I think, as people think. Where some people think Goblins is a mindless ramp Muxus, it's a lot more complicated than that, and it takes a really intelligent and smart player to kind of be able to assemble the combo pieces and deploy them in ways and play around removal to kind of assemble your combo and get that aggressive one-turn kill in, if you can. Sometimes it's not, but it's not all about getting a one-turn kill. Sometimes it's just about getting big, a lot of little threats out there and pinging away. But sometimes it is about the one-turn kill. It's an interesting deck, and it's not as linear as people think, and I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So that about does it for Muxus Goblin Grandee. Not as great as you think, not as fantastic as a card as you think. He's more of a Hail Mary than he is the best card in the Goblins deck. So thanks everybody for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.